suppose, what I'd start to look at bringing it back to is, the societal benefits are always paramount to us as a business because, we're always asked, where does Wejo fit in the ecosystem between the end user and the OEM? And it always comes back to, okay, so the OEMs have had this data asset since, in some cases 1996, when we go right back to connectivity, and you've always had the client side of things where it's, okay, if we had these particular sensors, this would be an absolute game changer for the industry. That is where Wejo positions ourselves in the ecosystem, is to bridge that gap between the OEMs and the end clients. But also with those end clients, we need to be really, really cognizant that there has to be a real benefit to the driver. And at the end of the day, the driver is, it's me, it's you. Well, not given that we're UK based, but it's, we are the end
Yeah.
consumers in this instance. So a good example of this would be around EV usage. EV usage has, absolutely rocketed even in the last 12 months, and especially when you start to look at recent mandates in California, for example, completely emission-free car sales by 2035. And that's 14 years away. That might seem like a long time, but it's really not. When you start to think about, okay, where do we position 250,000 new charging stations across California? That is a huge undertaking for a public sector entity. And they need to start actually gathering that intel now to be able to inform properly, so that when 2035 hits, they've not completely got that model wrong. And again, that's where the data set lends itself to that type of use case.
I think on that aspect that, it's even at the, how should we say it, all US level, sort of like, I'm trying to think, the local administrations kind of input in terms of, real big focus, real big drive nationally across the US. As we're all aware, this is something that's important for a global kind of focus of movement away from the emissions element, the pollution element as well. So I think that's another touch point that we can touch on, that ultimately by understanding where to put charge points, the movements of vehicles from A to B in downtown, etc. You can also get an understanding from Wejo's data already, what the amount of vehicles that will be in a given area that could be polluting, what that looks like as a trend and change over time. We've had many conversations, not perhaps in the government space, but more in sort of the charge point provider space, where it's a conversation around, well, we don't necessarily need to know all the EVs right now, where all just EVs are, but you've got to think about that. Again, I used the word, I mentioned it earlier on, another paradigm shift in the kind of movement of people using a completely different mode of transport. I think there was an interesting article that we saw, and it's been accentuated further by the pandemic, that yes, there's a lot of people out there that charge, in a recent study that Wejo's done, that charge at home in their own driveway, etc., where they charge an electric vehicle. But there are a lot of people downtown, many, many millions of people globally, that don't have that kind of ability to have their own private charge points. So let's think about terms of like New York City. There was articles where it was very, very difficult to get a parking space during the pandemic because nobody was leaving anymore. Everybody was sitting there for hours and hours a day. So I guess that's again where Wejo's kind of analysis of trends of vehicles, how could we put it, right now from ICE vehicles, what that could mean in terms of capacity of charge point management in the future as well. So I think that's the one thing we haven't mentioned so far. Unfortunately, fortunately, the pandemic element has really sort of exacerbated a few things for Wejo. I don't know if there's any points we could reference in that.
I would certainly pick up on, the big thing we've seen is, as a good example, the I mean, what was already a boom around parking really is a boom now,
Yeah,
because all of a sudden, if you take New York as an example, where everybody would have traveled out of New York and commuted to the outer boroughs, and that would have freed up parking space in the
yeah,
inner city areas, that's no longer happening because a huge proportion of people are working from home. So whereas, there's a stat that the average person spends, I think it was something like a solid 6 days a year. The average New Yorker spends 6 days a year hunting for a parking space. All of a sudden, that becomes 8 or 9 days a year, because there's just not that same level, excuse me, of parking availability that there was before, because everybody's working from home. And that is
yeah,
definitely a trend that we are seeing within our own data set. At peak times during the pandemic, we were seeing 56% less journeys in some states where regional lockdowns were implemented. And obviously, if you're seeing 56% less journeys, you've seen 56% less park in and park out events. So there's definitely been a shift that we've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think that's fair to say across multiple marketplaces, just the extreme impact of the pandemic. I know a lot of our customers who've been using data to understand origin to destination analysis have seen a real shift. You know, that's really obvious during a time when people are locked down within their city or within their in their local region. But that's really, really important as well for retailers to understand where people are traveling from and to, and the impact. You know, I mean, we're not out of the woods yet. I hope we're nearly there, but I think we've got a little while to go with the impacts of COVID-19. Just in terms of how different restrictions in different areas will affect how people travel, you know, interstate, into cities, like you say, more people working from home. And there's a whole wealth of analysis that can be driven from the Wejo data. And I think, I mean, just one of the points from me to take a bit of a step back, because I think we've had quite an involved discussion here. But I guess for the people that are listening to this, maybe thinking about how do I use that data? You know, how do I ingest, absorb, you know, the data into my solution? And what I would say is there are a number of different ways that Wejo will be able to service that, from what I would call source data. So you know, having access to more or less the raw material to overlay with other data sets can provide really great analysis. But we do also offer this data in intelligence format, which helps, you know, our end users to get to the root of the answer to the question they're asking much quicker. I think that's really important to make the audience aware as we're having this discussion today.
Yeah, I mean, let's take the concept of parking at a very basic level. You know, an agency or a municipality to want to understand, okay, I have a piece of parking real estate. All I know is X number of people park in that piece of parking real estate. I have no clue where they come from, and I have no idea how to better manage the congestion levels. Because if you think about some of the larger businesses, if you know, stick a huge supermarket or in an area, you are technically responsible for the congestion that actually inflicts on the general area. You know, I know for example, you know, Disney World have to manage their congestion levels and their parking extremely closely. So
Mm-hmm.
for a business to be able to understand, okay, my average person that visits my location comes from 7 miles away, all of a sudden my models may be completely off.
Mm.
And again, that comes into the benefit of the data, and the fact that we can say at a very basic level, to this particular waypoint, this is where your visitations are coming from, and at a statistically significant level. This is not just saying one journey. These are, you know, in the realms of 1.3, 1.4 billion journeys a month that we're looking at.